Good afternoon and welcome to our first Lamlac podcast. I'm Abby Fisher from Volac and I'm joined today by our guest speaker, Laura Bernard. So our topic today is surrounding some of the common myths and misconceptions in the lambing shed or field, which we have kindly been sent in from some of our sheep farmers through Facebook. So Laura and I are going to have a look at these today and discuss them and see if perhaps we can, see if they're true or if they are myths, and also have a go at busting or clarifying some of these for our followers on Facebook. So firstly, before we kick off, I'd just like to say hi to Laura. Thanks for joining us. Hi, Laura.
Hello.
Hi. Would you like to just quickly introduce yourself to our listeners before we get started?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Laura. I'm a sheep and cattle farmer on our family farm. We run approximately 550 to 600 breeding ewes, along with 70 suckler herd. So we've got quite a bit going on. And that's about it, really. We've got a commercial flock, and we've got a very small flock of pedigree Texels as well.
So you've got good oversight of, commercial and a bit more of a specialist unit as well. So that's really great. Okay, so should we get myth busting?
Let's go for it.
I think we've got 5 myths today. So I'll kick off. The first one we've been sent is rearing pet lambs doesn't pay. So Laura, do you want to have a crack at that one?
I think with rearing pet lambs, it should be taken into an individual account with each lamb. So you've got to look at, for example, what is their value worth at the end produce. So are you breeding for the food chain, or are you breeding for a, like I do with my pedigree flock, to have the sires? Is that going to be worth your money? You've got to weigh up your pros and cons. Well, that's what I think you should do anyway, to make sure that it is worth it, because it's not a cheap way to raise lambs in any way. I think I worked out that you can probably spend between 40 and £60 per lamb in milk and creep feed alone, just to get them to keep kept up with your normal lambs that are on the ewes. And also I think the system that you're using has a big impact on this, on whether you're bottle feeding or having a machine do it. I think depending on your setup, one will work better than the other. We actually use both setups here. So for our little pedigree flock, if I have anything from that is just bottle fed, and it's kept at home and it's fed for a bit longer because it's going to be worth more in the end. But our commercials are all popped onto a machine and they're fed for 6 weeks, and then they're onto the creep and away they go. But yes, again, you've got to look at the end value before you finish. You'll make a decision on what you're going to do.
Yeah, weigh up your options. Yeah, and I think like you say, it's really key to make sure that whatever you do decide to do, try and do it in the most efficient way that you can, and pay really close attention to the husbandry, and really think about how you're going to do it before you do it, to make sure you can maximise the potential of the lambs that you do decide to rear.
Yes, absolutely. And some of them just aren't doers, if that makes sense. Some lambs are just never meant to be anything spectacular. So you're always going to spend more money on those than what you are that's something that's got a bit of what we call a bit of a spring of life to it. Because some lambs are everything's the same, really, isn't it? Whatever you look at, whether it's sheep or cows, everything. You've got one that bounce up and drink straight away. You've got some that are a bit slower. So you've got to make sure you're putting all your pros and cons into context before you make a decision.
Yeah, and I guess that, if you're rearing it because it was weak and had a bad start in the first place, it's different to if you decided before it was even born that it was going to be raised, away from the ewe. So, you might have a different outcome depending on which one you've ended up with, I guess.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. Sometimes you're going to get little tiny lambs, and then you're going to get big triplets, and your big triplet versus your little tiny one's always going to do better, no matter what way it's raised. So you've just got to make sure you're doing all your maths and putting your brain into gear to get that all in place before you go for it.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, great. So should we move on to our second one?
Absolutely. So our second one is lambs shouldn't be weaned abruptly.
Yeah, I think, it's a really good question to ask. I would say that when you're weaning lambs, it's important to think about the method you use to feed them in the first place. So, for example, if you're bottle feeding, it's easier when you come to weaning them that you can restrict the milk more easily, and you've got more control over that. Whereas if you're feeding them ad lib and they've got free choice access all of the time, when it comes to weaning, if you start trying to sort of reduce that amount slowly, then actually all you're doing is making them more likely to gorge on it when you do actually offer it to them, and you risk other complications like digestive upsets, and that kind of thing. So actually, I think if you're bottle feeding, yes, slowly weaning is okay. But if you're ad lib feeding, we would actually say abrupt feeding is the right way to go, and looking at other methods to help you with the weaning, such as reduce the temperature of the milk rather than reduce the quantity, reduce the number of teats that you offer them. That sort of thing. So yeah, that's sort of what I think, really. And we actually have a really good blog on it on our Lamlac website that I think if people aren't sure on which way to do it, to have a look at that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, actually. And I think sometimes when you're doing it on the machine, perhaps giving them an extra week on the machine and then cutting them off actually does them a few favours. We did, one year we did try, when they were getting to sort of the 5-week mark, we did try switching them over to bottles and we had all sorts of problems. So we then decided from then on we're going to get to 5-6 weeks, cut them off, out on the grass, plenty of creep. And actually they did really well after that. They really flourished. So you've got to do a bit of trial and error. But yes, I absolutely agree with you.
Yeah, I think I think it's just really important when, it's a bit like with your first point, it's about taking it, but, on an individual basis and depending on what your situation is and just really thinking about the key things. So, what you're trying to achieve with weaning, you're trying to move them onto a solid diet and not have too many setbacks when you remove the milk. So, make sure you're looking for them eating enough creep and, that they're hitting their targets, they're growing, and that they're old enough. And then, look at the way you're doing it depending on how you're feeding them. And yeah, if you're ad lib feeding, then yeah, abrupt weaning is a good way to go.
Yes, yeah, I agree. And with the bottles, we actually tend to reduce it. We cut a feed towards the end and then cut them off. So
great. Okay, cool. So halfway through. So our third myth is when faced with a hypothermic lamb, what should you do? So we've got two different questions that have come in here, both regarding hypothermia, and one is about should you give them warm milk to drink or should you submerge the lamb in warm water? So I'm happy to sort of kick this one off if you want, Laura.
Yeah, go for it.
Just that, I think when you're dealing with a hypothermic lamb, it is always tricky, and I don't think there is a one-size-fits-all approach. So I think it's really important to just assess the lamb that's in front of you before you're actually making decisions on how to treat it. And you're going to need a different approach depending on what's happening. So things like, how old is it? What's its current temperature? What's happened to it up to that point? So, for example, if it's under 5 hours, brand new lamb, and it has got a low temperature, so I think we'd say like below 37 degrees, that it won't actually be able to digest any milk. So they're saying here, give it warm milk to drink. So if it's a young lamb and it's got a low temperature, it won't be able to digest that. So that would actually just lead to it sitting in the stomach. The lamb won't be able to cope with that. So it's important to bring its temperature up first. However, if you've got an older lamb, then it's going to have low blood sugar. So, you're going to need to gently warm it before you feed it. But then submerging it in warm water might just, push the temperature up too quickly and actually just cause it to go into shock. So, I think that's sort of what I think. I don't know if you have any points there.
I've never used the submerging method before. It's just, there's something about it that I think, that you could overheat the lamb, or then it could get warm, and then if it doesn't dry properly, it could sit cold again. So I've never actually used that. We've always used the classic heat lamp hot water bottle, slowly tiny bits of milk until they start really wanting it, before we've gone for the whole, here, let's try and warm you up. I think slowly is the best approach for hypothermic lambs, especially when they're tiny, because their bodies just don't cope with anything that you throw at them. You've got to do everything very carefully. I know it's tedious work with little lambs, but it's got to be done, hasn't it? So no, I've never used the submerging. We've always used the warm up slowly method. So when I read that myth, I was a bit like, I've never actually used the submerging one, but that's because it's my own personal thoughts along those lines. I didn't really see how that perhaps would be beneficial in all situations.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think we have been asked this question quite a few times in the past at Volac, and I think we actually wrote a blog on this topic on its own, and we had a lot of interaction with the post, because it was it's just so popular, and it is quite a hard thing, especially if you're new to sheep rearing. It might be quite a daunting task to deal with, and what we actually did is we've sort of done a diagram, and actually what situations the lamb in, and you can follow it through and answer all the questions, and eventually you get to the right course of action, and that's been really popular. Actually, I think it's probably been our most downloaded thing off of our website, so which is good to hear. So.
Yes, that is. Well, any advice is good advice, but you've just got to use it as you feel fit. That's what I've always been told. So, but yes, the hypothermic lamb issue is a very difficult one to get you to the right answer, isn't it? And not everything's going to work, and you've got to just be ready and adaptable to change as and when you need to.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, okay, perfect. So this one, this next one made me chuckle a little bit. So
me too.
Yeah, and I've actually put here, I wrote a note. Maybe Laura knows the answer to this. So the myth is, if you leave your rams out at night, the ewes will lamb at night. What do you think of this one? So, Laura, any answers? I'm a bit stumped.
I wrote a very short sentence to this earlier. I put, this made me laugh. You can't control nature. And then I ended it with a full stop, because it's the most ridiculous myth I've never heard it before, for a start. And secondly, it's ridiculous. That's like saying, I don't know, I don't know whether you have children. I've got two children that, one was born early morning and the other in the afternoon.
Yeah.
Nature's a thing that you can't control. It's ridiculous. It really is.
Exactly. It's like, I did say, if somebody has the answer to how you can control your ladies to that extent, then let us know. I think. No,
it's ridiculous. It really is. I would love to know the person who wrote that in too, because I'd be like, I'd really have to look at them very long and hard. But I thought that was really funny. But no, I think it's a load of nonsense. You can't control nature. They're going to lamb when they want to lamb, and that's it. At the end of the day.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's leave that up to them, and I'll look forward to seeing any answers that come in on that one. So yeah, great, good. So I'm glad we both agree on that one. So the next one, moving swiftly on, is so you should always feed your lamb milk replacers at 37 to 39 degrees.
I think warm milk is very important when they're young. But as they get older, I don't think it really makes a difference with growth rates and daily weight gains. But the first couple of weeks, I would always feed warm milk. And then as they get older, I'd gradually let it get cooler, because I don't think it makes any difference. But I think it does when they're little, because they are so small and their bodies can't cope with everything. And if they're ingesting cold milk, it's going to sit cold in their belly, and it's going to have to work harder to warm up to then go through the digestive system. So yes, I do think in the early days, yes, very important. As they're older, not so much.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And I think, it's really good advice that, when they're brand new, feed them at 37. That's absolutely fine. But especially if you're feeding ad lib, so similar to the, the abrupt weaning one, then we would advise that it is important to reduce the temperature to something like 18, 20 degrees to sort of two reasons really, I suppose: to curb their enthusiasm over just drinking the whole lot and not eating much else, and also to encourage them to take the dry feed. I think it's important, isn't it? Yeah. I think I was just going to make a point here. I just put a tip. One tip, because we get this question a lot, is if you're feeding cold, is to offer it cold, because I think we do see a lot of instances where people are feeding ad lib and they will mix the milk warm and they'll put it in the pen, and all the lambs rush and try and drink it then and there. Whilst it's still warm, rather than if you just offer it cold from the start, then they're used to the cold milk and just.
It's a bit like, you don't want to drink a cold cup of tea, do you? You always want a nice warm cup of tea. So the lambs are going to think the same, aren't they? It's much nicer warm, so we'll have it warm. So yes, very good, valid point. I think that if you're going to feed cold, you need to make sure you're offering it cold, because otherwise they're just going to gorge, aren't they?
Yeah,
when
definitely.
It's there in front of them.
Definitely, yes. Okay. Well, I think we have, really stormed through those myths. We've got to the end of the list, I think, which is great. So, so actually, I just want to say thank you to all of our Facebook followers who sent in these great questions. Keep them coming, and we'll keep trying to bust them as we can. And also thank you, Laura, for coming in today and joining me on this.
You're welcome.
Obviously got wealth of experience on all of this, which is great. And I think hopefully, discussing this kind of thing just, highlights the importance of visiting, good sources of information and going to people who have the, the expertise and, long-term knowledge like yourself to help give, good advice, really.
Wealth of knowledge, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I always, when I was younger, I learned a hell of a lot off my granddad and my dad. My dad's still around. But you've got to take your little snippets from everybody, really, and learn, as you go along, but also listen to what other people are telling you. You might not agree with everything, but listening and learning is very, very important, especially when you're doing a job like ours. Yep,
no, definitely. Oh, well, thank you very much. Please do visit our Lamlac website at www.lamlac.co.uk. There's loads of information on there, particularly on the topics that we discussed in this podcast. It can all be accessed and downloaded for free from the Lamlac advice page. We've also just recently published some more downloadable posters that provide best practice advice on lambing. So do visit the website. You can print them out, stick them up wherever you like on your farm. And we really do hope that you've enjoyed our first podcast. And thanks once again for listening. Bye.